Friday, July 21st, 1961 was ranked the fourth hottest day in Washington, D.C. that year, coming in at 93 degrees. And so the children on their summer school break were trying to keep cool. Amongst those was a young girl named Hattie, who went to play at Rock Creek Park with some friends and her older brother. But the water at Rock Creek Park wasn't safe to swim in, and a series of events surrounding this would provide opportunity for Hattie to be placed in danger. At first, there were leads, tips, and attention, but over time, those leads dried up, and now, nearly 64 years later, the questions remain, with no answers in sight. Something we hope renewed attention to the case can change. I'm your host, Megan, and each week on A Simpler Time True Crime, I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time means a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved abduction of Hattie Jackson. Today's case was a listener request from several months ago. Interestingly enough, the case had already been on my list, and this listener not only requested it, but shared with me what she had already found about the case. I knew I wanted to cover it, but I was hoping to find buried information. And the truth is, even after all of these years and all of these months, this is a challenging case to get original documents on because of how old it is. But I was met with some success, and so I want to share the connections I found and where the case stands today. Just as a content warning, a potential connecting case is discussed later in this episode, and it has some graphic details related to the murder of a child. In this case, I do share some more details that I typically don't share or would avoid because they're a little bit graphic, but they are significant to the case. As always, I never share more graphic details than are necessary, so let's get into it. Hattie Yvonne Jackson was born on September 22, 1954. She had a brother Harold who was 3 years older than her. Her father, Harold Sr., was a photostat operator for the Weather Bureau. The photostat machine took pictures of documents before Xerox and the photocopier made them obsolete. Not a lot is out there about Hattie other than the fact that she was a sweet girl who attended school at Truesdell Elementary School in Northwest Washington, D.C. Her and her family resided in a row house on the 5600 block of 8th Street Northwest in D.C., about 6 blocks from Rock Creek Park. Rock Creek Park encompasses over 1,700 acres, and when you combine it with its affiliated sites, say Meridian Hill Park, Dumbarton Oaks, and several traffic circles, it manages nearly 3,000 acres. It is therefore the largest park in green space within the city limits. If you consume a lot of true crime content and were alive in the early 2000s, you also might recognize it as the location of the high-profile murder case of D.C. intern Chandra Levy. As I mentioned at the top of the episode, July 21st was a sweltering hot day, and many neighborhood kids were looking for a way to cool off. And the Jackson kids were no different. Late that morning, Mrs. Jackson packed lunches for her kids who were going to be getting together with some friends to play at the park. Now, before I go into the details of what happened next, I want to just say that a lot of the news articles discuss Hattie's brother Harold Jr.'s story changing slightly a few times, and I spent a lot of time poring over these details. I personally don't believe that the facts of the story really change all that much at all. It's my opinion that the quote-unquote variances have to do with how officers were interpreting the 10-year-old boy's play-by-play of events. As a mom myself, I know sometimes when my kids have shared stories with me, they're so fixated on certain details, the chronological order may not be that important to them, or details that I as an adult may find particularly important may not hold significance to them, and vice versa. And that's what you'll sort of see play out here. Because I think all details can be important, I'm going to give a more high-level overview of the events, and then as I go through the chronological investigation, I'll share more specific details as they come out. So the high-level overview goes like this. The children that day go swimming in the water of Rock Creek Park. A police officer then approaches them and says, "You can't swim here, the water is polluted," and asks the children to get out. Mind you, there were many kids swimming there on this day, not just the Jackson children and their companions. Sometime around this time, a man nearby who has been sitting on a rock approached the children and said he knew of a swimming spot that wasn't polluted about 2 miles up the road and that he'd be happy to drive them there by his car. The children, with one of the boys acting as their spokesperson for the group, declined the invitation and they headed up towards a nearby playground area. Hattie seems to have had some interaction with the gentleman though, and somewhere along the way, the boys decide to ditch the playground and go back and jump on the rocks, and they lose track of Hattie. Now Harold Jr. was the big brother, and he has a real panicked moment and spends a significant amount of time with his companions trying to locate his little sister himself on his own without any professional help. We're talking hours. When he can't find her, he realizes something must have happened, and he knows he must alert the adults. So he goes back home, and the police are called. And to their credit, this isn't one of those scenarios of complete nonsense where they say, maybe she ran away. Police think one of two things. She is either lost in Rock Creek Park or she's been abducted, and they quickly initiate a large-scale search. Soon, witnesses would come forward saying they saw someone matching Hattie's description getting into a vehicle with someone who matched the description of the guy saying he could take them somewhere else to swim. And so with this high-level overview being established, let's dig into the details, starting with the initial search for Hattie. We know first that the boys, which includes Hattie's 10-year-old brother Harold Jr. and his friends, that they conducted a search of their own. Now, as adults with our fully developed prefrontal cortex, we're probably thinking, why wouldn't they immediately go say Hattie's missing? First of all, remember we're in the 1960s, when there wasn't a 24-hour news cycle immediately telling us when something bad has happened in any part of the world. And so a lot of this whole simpler, safer time bubble of security developed because people didn't realize it could happen because they weren't aware of it happening immediately within their neighborhood. So I highly doubt the boys were thinking that Hattie had been taken. Rather, they were likely concerned about how much trouble they were going to be in for losing track of her, wondering if she had wandered off, and I imagine even as they went home to say, hey, we can't find Hattie, they very well could have expected her to be waiting for them back there, having left them at the park and walking home herself. When they got home and she wasn't there, police were then called and they jumped into action. According to reporting in the Washington Daily News, police from the immediate jurisdiction, along with park police and citizens, combed over the park. When she wasn't immediately found, others were pulled into an all-night search with 18 canine dogs. By morning, the search party grew even larger. 160 officers, many of whom were off duty, were searching alongside volunteers. Search dogs were given a pair of Hattie's pajamas that she had worn on Thursday, the night before she disappeared, and they followed her scent for a short trail. The scent led away from the playground and was traced along a small footpath adjacent to Beach Drive and then to a little parking area off of Beach Drive. It then abruptly stopped. The search continued on with officers from the 3rd, 6th, 7th, 8th, 10th, and 13th precincts searching from Blagden Avenue all the way over to the zoo and back to the Maryland state line. The area has changed over the years, but I'll have a lot of corresponding photos on my Instagram page at SimplerTimeCrimePod. On Saturday the 22nd, police also released information they had received from a witness statement. The witness was the park police officer, Private O.D. Sidnor. He said he observed a white man sitting on a rock watching children swim in Rock Creek. This included one little girl who matched Hattie's description. Officer Sidnor stated that he approached the kids and told them they needed to leave because the creek was too polluted to swim in safely. He recalled that he saw the children starting to get out, but he didn't stick around to see what happened after. Sunday, July 23rd, police released the first full story they had pulled together from the boys and other witnesses. Herbert Jr. and Hattie had arrived at the park that day and met up with 3 of Herbert's friends: 11-year-old Marvin Jones, 9-year-old Louis Beeman, and 8-year-old Desi Curto. According to reporting in the Evening Star, the boys reported they had all gone down to the water and were splashing around in some shallow water, playing on the rocks. At some point, they noticed a man sitting on the rocks watching them. He began engaging with them, telling them that he knew of a place with nice blue water, a great spot as he described it, about 2 miles up the road, and that he would happily take them in his vehicle. The kids declined his offer and continued playing, until Park Police Officer Sidnor drove up in his vehicle, told them to get out of the water, and drove off, with Officer Sidnor recalling that he still saw the man watching them at this time. I know hindsight is 20/20, but it physically pains me to know that law enforcement didn't just stop and keep an eye on these kids until the man went away or question him further, like, what are you doing here? But I know it's not illegal to sit on a rock, and again, I know it's hindsight. It's just sad that this could have ended so differently. According to the same reporting, after Officer Sidnor left, they went back towards the playground, with the man ahead of them, and eventually they doubled down and went back towards the creek. And they said at that time, Hattie stayed with this man. There was also 2 other teen witnesses that came forward: Emmanuel Carr, who was 14 years old, and Nicholson Brown, who was 14 and about to turn 15. They told investigators that they were on the footpath that day and witnessed a white man walking with a young black girl on the footpath, and that at one point he even squatted down to her level and pointed out his vehicle to her. They then saw this gentleman guide the young girl into the vehicle, a bluish-gray Chrysler, possibly a Plymouth. And I'll have a picture of what they think the vehicle looked like on the Instagram. Another witness came forward to say their car was parked nearby in the same parking lot and that they witnessed the same exact thing as those 2 boys. By Monday, July 24th, 1961, police expanded their search to look at sites bodies had been found in the months leading up to Hattie's disappearance. Their belief was that perhaps the killer would have repeated a ritual and dumped a body again in the same location. One such location was the place the body of a 7-year-old boy named Michael Condetti had been found in November of 1960. Michael had returned home from school on an early November day, telling his mom he really wanted this book bag that had a Boy Scout logo on it. After much discussion, his mother told him that he could walk 2 blocks to the local variety store and look for this backpack. He could price them out, bring the information home, and that when his father got home from work that night, they would discuss it. A clerk at the store verified that Michael came in. She said he was looking for this specific backpack, and she told him that this particular one he was looking for wasn't in stock and that she could happily call to the other locations and see if they had it in stock. She recalled how he excitedly told her that he had joined Boy Scouts and he wanted to be like his big brother, who was a Boy Scout, and that his big brother had earned all these badges. And that's why he was so intent on getting this particular backpack. He left the store, but she remembers that he curiously just a little while later returned with money in his hand, and there was a man walking behind him. She again let him know that they didn't have this one he was looking for in store, and she watched him walk out with the man. He was never seen alive again after that day, and days later his body was found in a nearby secluded area, nude, and he had been sexually assaulted. Knowing his killer was out there, police looked in the area his body was found, but they found no sign of Hattie there or any other location. On Tuesday, July 25th, police released a composite sketch of the suspect. They had used what was called an identikit, which was growing in popularity at the time. I know I've talked about this vintage identikit on some other episodes I've done, but this was advanced beyond just basic artist renderings, which is what they had to rely on beforehand, and artist renderings left a lot up to interpretation. Instead, they used this identikit, which is a kit that contains more than 40,000 photographs made all over the world. There's 52 chins, from weak to strong, 102 different types of eyes, anywhere from squinty to popped, 33 types of lips from thin to full, 32 noses, 80 eyebrows, 126 hairlines, an assorted group of wrinkles, scars, beards, mustaches, hats, you name it. So this is what they were using. In fact, new law enforcement officers were trained on it, and that's how they came up with this particular composite sketch. The man was described as in his 30s, deeply tanned, with brown, bushy hair combed back, an oval face, a smallish mouth with thin lips, and they said he was around 5'8" and around 170 to 180 pounds. They said he was wearing a white t-shirt or sports shirt, light brown or gray trousers, and highly polished black shoes with a round toe. He was also wearing sunglasses. By July 26th, police released to the media that they had received a phone tip that the composite sketch looked a lot like a sexual predator that had been released on bond. While they didn't mention who this person was at the time, they said that they were taking this tip seriously and looking into it. And I'll share who I think this was a little while later. More than a week into the investigation, police and Hattie's family were growing more and more concerned about Hattie's safety and the outcome of the investigation. Hattie's father said that Hattie was not the type to wander off. Her mother shared that she had recently come home from school and told her how they had learned not to talk to strangers and not to go with strangers, and that her daughter would not be one to do so. And that the only way her daughter would have gone with someone was if he had tricked her. And I think that's probably true. I don't know if any of you as listeners recall this, but Dateline did a series years ago called My Kid Would Never, and they put kids on camera in situations that, unbeknownst to them, were simulated, and there were cameras filming nearby while parents watched. And they were scenarios like a stranger knocking at the door, or luring you into an ice cream truck, or asking for help. And parents went into the experiment saying, absolutely no way my kid would. We talked about this. They know better. We've trained for this. And time after time, you'd see the horrified look on their faces as their kids would fall into a trap. And what is interesting is that sometimes you could even see on the kids' faces that they were a little bit weirded out or second guessing themselves, but the actor playing the quote unquote bad guy insisted or doubled down, and they gave in to be polite. So I believe Mrs. Jackson was correct that he probably did trick Hattie with some sort of story. And I also believe that sometimes our kids will not always be able to apply what they learn because they're little people and they're learning and they're up against a calculated adult predator. So they don't even have a fair shot. One other lead came up in this first week to 10 days. A woman said she had seen a vehicle driving into the park with a young African-American girl in it pounding on the window saying, "Let me out." Police took down information about this, but they struggled with the legitimacy of it, because why would the car be driving into the park? So they told the press about it, but nothing more really came of it. With police running into dead ends, they decided to go back to the drawing board and to do something a little unconventional to sharpen their focus. In early August of 1961, police took Harold Jr. and had him walk through his day in real time. They left the house at the same time and followed all the same steps and movements he would have taken with him. To some degree, this could have been seen as a little controversial because as a 10-year-old boy with his sister missing, it's probably a little traumatic. But it did provide critical clues, and it helped patch together some of what I was talking about earlier. that with the little kid emphasis on chronological order not always being there, and not only their perception, but their articulation of events. So for example, they realized they needed to bump up their timeline an hour. That's because in their heads, they had thought Hattie may have been abducted around 3 p.m. on the day she went missing. And that's because of earlier statements from her brother. But they realized that what he was saying was that he started circling back to look for her at 3. And based on the other witness statements, she was actually likely abducted about an hour before that. It's just that because he's 10, he was preoccupied. So they had their timeline wrong. And why the hour is so significant is that it helped police to eliminate certain vehicles that were spotted in the park later, and it narrowed down the alibi window for anybody who was investigated for the crime. So here's what they found, and this next part is going to be a direct passage from an article I linked in the show notes from the Evening Star. It read, "A contingent of Metropolitan and Park Police, led by Inspector Sullivan and Lieutenant Thomas I. Harley, followed Herbert as he walked 1.2 miles from the playground at 16th and Kennedy Streets Northwest, down Morrow Drive along Beach Drive to the spot where the youngsters went swimming. Herbert told police that shortly before he and his sister ate lunch at the playground, he heard a man tell a friend that it was 4 minutes of 12. He and Hattie ate lunch at a stand there, he said, and went for a ride on the playground swings and seesaw. Herbert said he then suggested they go swimming. After police were led by Herbert to the swimming site, a group of 3 boys who had been there when Herbert and Hattie arrived showed police how they had jumped on rocks in the creek. They had put their clothes on a rock and started to swim, they said. The boys pointed to a boulder where they said a white man had been sitting watching them swim. 'Let me see you swim,' they quoted him as saying. They told police that after a park policeman had warned them not to swim in the polluted water, the stranger explained the meaning of pollution and offered to take them to a clear water about 2 miles away, but they refused. Herbert and the boys led Lieutenant Harley and Sergeant Gertrude Gottel up a steep path directly across the road from the swimming site. This was the shortcut they had taken to go back to the playground area after the policeman had stopped them from swimming. The boys told police that Hattie and the man walked ahead of them as they climbed the hill. When they reached a clearing at the top, the boys said that they stopped and they could see Hattie on the swing with the man beside her. They then decided that they turned back to go back down the hill and jump on the rocks again. 2 of the boys quoted Herbert as saying, "Oh, Hattie will be all right." I want to thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you haven't already, please take a moment to leave a 5-star review and share the podcast with your friends. I'm on a mission to connect with more families to do collaborative episodes, so if that's you or someone you know, please have them reach out to me. I appreciate all your support as always, and now back to the show. My heart breaks for Herbert Jr. as I cannot imagine the burden he carried as a young boy feeling responsibility towards his younger sister. And while we can point to missteps from Herbert Jr. and his friends, he was a child, a small child, and the only person responsible here is the man who abducted Hattie. At this point, the FBI was heavily involved, and they did their own composite sketch. I'll have a copy of that along with the other one on the Instagram page. It's fairly similar to the existing one, but a little more pronounced and human looking. By late August of 1961, a $500 reward was put out for information, which is a little over $5,000 here in 2025. That still felt low to me, and it turns out others thought so too. And so a local person wrote to the paper petitioning for more of the community to come together to raise funds, but I can't tell if that actually ever happened. Harold Jr. was perpetually shown photos of criminals or suspects as police brought people in for various crimes. By August, he had his 11th birthday, and he continued to view colored pictures of men picked up by police, there in DC and surrounding jurisdictions. By August 31st, about 6 weeks after Hattie's abduction, police got another bizarre lead. A man was trying to lure children, and one was possibly abducted. According to an article in the Evening Star, a 41-year-old woman named Martha Baker called police. Before I go any further, I'll say this is the toughest part of doing old cases because Martha is no longer alive. She'd be over 100 years old today, and if she's the Martha Baker I found, she did live a very long life, and I'm just a handful of years shy of connecting with her. But she called police on this day because she said her grandson, who is Bobby Shelton, and his friend Priscilla Moore were approached by a suspicious man. She said that her grandson ran up to her and said that the man had tried to coax him and Priscilla into his car around 1st Street Northwest. He had apparently said he wanted to show them something. According to Mrs. Baker, she immediately thought of Hattie, and so she started running towards that intersection. And she saw a small black boy in the front seat of the vehicle that her grandson had described, and that it was being driven by a white man. And when she hollered something, they drove away. But there was a problem. There were no kids matching that description that were listed as missing. Captain James Stargell of the 2nd Precinct directed a search of the 4-block area and said, quote, "We have no report of missing children, but there are so many children in the neighborhood with a babysitter taking care of them that it would take at least a day to account for all of them," end quote. So the media buzzed about this for a couple of days, but nothing came of it, so it seemed to be a false alarm. The next thing I'm going to tell you about could be a red herring, but I want to mention it. On September 2nd, 1961, a young girl named Ramona Price went missing. She was the same age as Hattie Jackson. But Ramona was white and in California. So why am I telling you this? Well, Ramona lived with her parents and they were getting ready to move. On the day she went missing, she told her father she was going to walk from their old home, and as they were packing up, she said, "I'm going to just take a walk to our new home." Her dad kind of thought she was joking because the new home was like 6 or 7 miles away. So he just said, "Okay, go to it then." And she went outside. There's mixed reports. Some say she came back and said that she was lost, and another said she went back outside afterwards. But either way, she went missing during this time, and she is still missing as of today. A few witnesses came forward to say they saw her getting into a faded gray or blue Plymouth, just like Hattie. Now, I'll be the first one to admit that this is a bit of a stretch, but the vehicle similarity made it worth mentioning. We know there are certain serial killers whose occupations or lack thereof give them a window to prowl across the United States, and prior to modern DNA advancements, it helped keep them undetected, so it wasn't that rare of a strategy. Killers and serial predators banked on the idea that there was no way to trace them and no communication between jurisdictions or across state lines. Police believe that Ramona Price was the victim of a prolific California serial killer named Mac Ray Edwards. He drove a similar vehicle, and his photo isn't super far off from the composite sketch in Hattie's case, though he'd be older than the perpetrator was suspected to be. Is it likely that it was him who was in Rock Creek Park that day? No. Is it a possibility? Yes. Honestly, we don't know. One of the things that's the most tricky is that this occurred in the nation's capital. People visit DC from all over. So I'm including it because of that overlap, and make of it what you will. One of the things that came out of the eyewitness descriptions of the vehicle that picked up Hattie was that it had a dark yellow license plate in the back, and police identified about 5 or 6 states where that could have come from. And you know, in certain states, seeing a bunch of out-of-state license plates would have been a red flag, but not in DC. DC has out-of-state plates all the time. There's constantly visitors there with different license plates. In mid-September 1961, police reported that they had a confession in Hattie's case. The suspect was a 33-year-old Washington, D.C. musician. According to reporting in the Evening Star, the man told police that he had killed the Jackson girl and left her body in a suitcase in a room in the 2300 block of Porter Street Northwest. After a search of that address didn't produce anything, the man then told police that he had stuffed her body into an incinerator at 14th and Fairmont Streets Northwest. That too led nowhere, so the police brought the man to these locations as well as all the way through Rock Creek Park, where he sort of wandered around and said where he had taken Hattie, and none of it really matched with the evidence, and there was no sign of Hattie Jackson, so they viewed this all as a false confession. On October 31st, 1961, police received a break, but not in Hattie's case. Remember little Michael I was telling you about earlier? Well, they arrested a suspect in his case. I'm not honestly even going to say his name because I don't like highlighting people who don't deserve it if possible. But this man admitted that he saw Michael at a bus stop. He struck up conversation with him, and he told him that he'd be able to help buy him that backpack. When Michael had come out of the variety store and told him, "I don't have enough money for what I'm looking for," he gave him some additional dollar bills and he went back into the store with him. Afterwards, he lured the boy away into the woods where he assaulted and murdered him. This was, of course, devastating. And as a mom myself, I have a hard time reading the details, which I'll spare you. But this man couldn't have been responsible for Hattie's murder because not only did he not own a vehicle, he did not know how to drive one. He strictly used public transportation. The next lead would come in May of 1962, a lead that many people view to be the answer to Hattie Jackson to this day. In May of 1962, a local worker named Jesse Davis spotted a clothesline floating in the Schuylkill River. Native Philadelphians, please forgive me if I butchered that. I really tried to research the pronunciation. So this area is a 2.5-hour drive north of Hattie's last known whereabouts. This worker reeled in the clothesline and he found the clothesline to be attached to a milk box. Within the milk box was something horrifying. A dead little girl who would be dubbed the girl in the box, named similarly to a 1950s crime of the boy in the box of Philadelphia. And this crime was horrific. And the content warning is here for this part. The corpse was a decapitated little girl. Her body had various injuries to it, including a partially severed finger with a bandage on it, which implied that whoever did it had at least some sort of temporary remorse for that injury. This was a little black girl, estimated to be between 4 to 6 years old, but they admitted because of the time and what they had to work with, they couldn't say for sure that that was even her age. Her hands, feet, and back were burnt in what was determined to be the killer trying to set her on fire after she was murdered, and it was unsuccessful. Another noteworthy clue was the white work apron that covered her. With her body was a March 11th, 1962 issue of the Philadelphia Daily Bulletin, which told police that whoever did this was at least in the Philadelphia area in March of 62. There were no other girls that went missing during this time that matched the description besides Hattie Jackson, and investigators were quick to make the connection. Unfortunately, back in 1962, there was no way to compare DNA. It just wasn't a thing. The medical examiner stated that he did not believe it was Hattie Jackson and effectively ruled her out, but there was no way of knowing for sure. It is worth noting that if it was Hattie, she would have had to have been kept alive for several months prior to this occurring. And if you wanted to be filled with rage, the body of the Philadelphia doe dubbed as Girl in the Box has been lost. She's not in the plot that she was supposedly buried in. So now, even though we have the technology, there is no way of comparing her and knowing. I had also heard that there was no DNA for Hattie Jackson, but in a comment section of an article about her from 2018, I saw one of her surviving nieces come forward and identify herself, and she offered up DNA if it was still needed. I don't know if authorities collected it, but it seems like Hattie does have a lot of living relatives. If you're one of them and you're listening, please reach out. I'd love to talk to you. At this time of the girl in the box discovery, authorities also released another person of interest who I think is the person referred to from several months ago as the man who was out on bond but had that violent sexual history. His name was Thomas Welton Holland, not to be confused with the wonderful Tom Holland actor of our current day. And he looked a lot like the composite sketch, and he was free during the time of Hattie's abduction. According to the New Pittsburgh Courier, Holland had a history of vicious sexual attacks on children, and he had been in jail but was released on parole from the Maryland State Penitentiary on March 28th of 1960. One condition of that parole was that he secure psychiatric help, but he never did seek out that psychiatric help and he skipped town. When it became apparent that he had done so and left the state of Maryland, a federal warrant with the FBI was issued on August 29th, 1961, charging him with unlawful interstate flight to avoid confinement after conviction of robbery. The FBI actually placed them on their top 10 most wanted list, and I have to believe that's because they genuinely believed he was a significant suspect in this Hattie Jackson case. I think if he had just skipped state lines on his parole and they didn't think he had committed something like this, it wouldn't have been a big deal. And they didn't come outright and say that. That's my speculation, but I'm just piecing together the information. The FBI said that he has been armed with a gun and knife in the past, and you should consider him extremely dangerous. Now, he did get captured in June of 1962 in Kansas, and he was never connected to Hattie's disappearance conclusively. He has since passed away, and if he's connected, we won't know. Almost all of Hattie's reporting came within the first year of her disappearance. I had one interesting observation in her case. As I was compiling information, I couldn't help but notice how much the composite sketch of her alleged abductor looked like a man I mentioned in last week's episode, James Mike Bardeleben. He has never been on the radar for this crime, but he was free and allegedly committed dozens of crimes all over the country that are unaccounted for. He typically attacked adult women, but he also would pick women that were in different themes, such as realtors or women walking home, and they were all different ages, so I don't totally rule out the idea that he would abduct a child. For the 1-year anniversary, Hattie's mother was interviewed, and she shared one tip that hadn't previously been shared with the public. On the very night Hattie went missing, a man called her house identifying himself as a police officer and saying Hattie had been found and was on her way home. It honestly choked me up to read about this because I imagined their hope. And at this time, police had not put all this out to the news yet. She had, in fact, not come home. She had not been found, and police verified that nobody had found her or made that call that worked for them. The phone number of the Jacksons was unlisted, and only friends and family had that number. The only other person who would have given it to the caller was Hattie. Since then, there have been no new leads in the disappearance of Hattie Jackson. While it's no longer being actively investigated due to the time that has passed, anybody with information is encouraged to contact the DC Metro Police Department agency phone number at 202-576-6768. So much time has passed, and if you've been carrying information and a secret, it's time to come forward and clear your conscience. This has been another episode of A Simpler Time True Crime. If you appreciate the work I'm doing, please leave a 5-star review, and case suggestions can be made to simplertimecrimepod@gmail.com. As always, thank you so much for listening, and join me again next Monday.